Hello, welcome back to Wednesday Weaving. There's been quite a lot of hype on the Facebook pages recently about winding a shuttle with a doubled thread. And while it sounds like this should be a relatively simple operation, there's very definitely a little trick to getting it right. Now, before I carry on, I am going to tell you that the chances of getting both of your threads when you're winding onto that shuttle exactly the same length are quite small. There will always be a very slight discrepancy in the tension as you're winding onto your shuttle, and you will end up with a small amount of difference in the length of your threads. But it shouldn't be such an enormous difference that you actually have to cut your threads off and then realign them before you can carry on. So I'm going to show you today 3 ways of doing this, and I'm also going to introduce you to my little trick that I use to keep the tension even. What I have here on the table are just a few balls of scraps. What can I say? We all have them. Just a few balls of leftovers so that I can use them for demonstration purposes. Now, we start off this operation in exactly the same way. I've got my 2 threads here, and they are of more or less equal length, and I'm just going to anchor them around my shuttle. Now, we've talked previously on this channel about winding a shuttle. If you prefer to wind with a figure of 8, that's absolutely fine, or a double figure of 8, or whatever you want to do. The same principles will apply that I'm going to show you now. I prefer to work with a straight wound shuttle. It's the way that I learned, and it's the way that I'm used to. You will work obviously with the way that suits you best. So I've got my 2 threads here wound onto the mouth of the shuttle, and what I'm doing now is I'm taking the threads over my index finger, one on either side of the index finger, and I'm using my index finger as a tensioning device. And I find that if you can get your index finger in between those 2 threads, on the one side I'm holding it with my thumb, and on the other side the blue thread is caught between my index finger and my middle finger. Now, you still, as you wind your shuttle, and especially in this case, because you're tensioning it between these 2 fingers here, the chances are that as you wind your shuttle, you're going to be inclined to wind your shuttle far too tight. You don't want to ever wind a tight shuttle. So now, more than ever, it's important that you get your fingers in between the shuttle and the yarn that's going onto the shuttle, so that you actually are winding around your fingers and giving that yarn a lot more space to move. Very important that as you go and you let that yarn run between your thumb and your index finger and your index finger and your middle finger, and you must give it plenty of room to wind onto the shuttle. So that's my first tip for winding a shuttle with a double thread. If you don't have 2 balls of yarn to wind from at the same time, quite a lot of people will do something like this, where they take the thread from the inside of the ball and the thread from the outside of the ball, and they will wind those 2 threads simultaneously onto the shuttle. And you can see they actually are going to come off the ball quite easily. Now, I find that if you're using what we would call a cake, like this, that's been wound like this, so sort of a square-shaped round thing as opposed to a ball of yarn, I find that if you're using yarn that has been wound in this way, that it's actually very easy to do a thread coming from either side. But I do urge you to be careful, because the thread that is coming from the inside of the ball or the inside of the cake is going to come out tighter than the thread that is running off the outside ball. So even if you anchor those 2 threads between your fingers, as I showed you, you are going to immediately be at a slight disadvantage, because your threads themselves are running at a different tension. So be careful of doing it that way. I find that if I'm using a single ball of yarn, the best thing to do is to simply wind a whole lot of yarn off the ball. Then it's just going onto the floor next to me very lightly. Try not to move it around, and you should be absolutely fine with that. And then all you do is you simply fold it in half, so you've got a little loop, just like that. And you take your shuttle, and using the loop as your tail, you again just anchor it around your shuttle. Get those 2 threads of yarn between your fingers and wind your shuttle. And it's as easy as that to wind a double thread. The key to the whole operation is to tension your 2 threads between your fingers. And that I have found to be the best way of controlling a double thread on your shuttle. I'm Glynis from Weave at Brooklands. I hope that you found this helpful. Remember, please, that if you have any questions or comments on the videos, feel free to post the comments and your questions below. I'll do my best to answer the questions, because remember that it's your questions that give me the fuel to continue making these little informational videos. I'll see you next week. Have a good one.